All right, then I'll jump right in. I know we've got a full schedule today. Yeah, thanks, Frank, for setting the stage. It's very good to be with you all this morning, and I'm looking forward to 2 productive days on this workshop. And so I'm going to try to set some of the scene here about these tokens, these bearer tokens, and what the future looks like for us. So we've got a whole landscape of authentication and authorization standards. We're all very familiar with the grid security infrastructure based on X509 certificates, X509 user certificates, and attribute certificates containing our organizational memberships in virtual organizations through VOMs. We also all use SAML single sign-on through InCommon and EduGain using our campus credentials to log in, often using Shibboleth software. And that SAML standard is still very relevant. It's based on XML. But what we're focused on in this workshop is tokens, and in particular, JSON Web Tokens, JWTs, or JOTs. You can pronounce it as a JOT. And so they don't use XML, they use JSON, JavaScript object notation. And these are digitally signed self-describing tokens, and they're bearer tokens. So the holder of the token presents it and is able to do what the token says they're able to do. And so we'll talk more about what that means to have a bearer token like that. These tokens fit very well into standard defined in OAuth. That's an authorization framework. It's optional to use JWTs or JOTs with OAuth, but that's definitely a good way of using OAuth. And OAuth gives us a framework for using tokens for limited access to resources and capabilities. And lastly, building on top of OAuth is OIDC, or OpenID Connect. I bet we'll hear about more throughout the workshop. That's an identity layer on top of OAuth, so you can authenticate with OIDC and then use OAuth to get your capability token as a second step. But in both cases, you can use a JOT for your identity token and then a JOT for your access token, your capability token. There's a lot in common between these standards. They'll have issuers of the credentials and verifiers. They're using JSON or XML, but there's a lot in that we can learn from, commonalities across these standards. But a real key thing that OAuth brings to the table is not just the ability to do identity-based authorization with access control lists like grid map files, or attribute-based authorization based on your membership in a virtual organization, for example, role-based access control based on what role you might have in the virtual organization, but also capability-based access control, where the token itself says what actions you're allowed to take on resources. And we can do least privilege authorization using these different technologies or these different types of access control. Least privilege authorization is something we strive for in a security system. It's a good security practice. We want to grant only those privileges that are required for only as long as they're required. That helps us limit our exposure in the system. So we can limit the privileges granted to an identity. We can limit the attributes that somebody has associated with their privileges. Assigning privileges to roles is another way of doing good least privilege, but capability-based authorization really gets us focused on this least privileged concept because we're issuing tokens that are granting only those privileges that are required for the task at hand. And so that can mean getting different tokens for different tasks throughout the day. And so we see this use of OAuth in our daily life on the internet. I'm sure you all see prompts like this when you're doing an OAuth flow. Some service wants access to your account, and it wants a specific wants access to specific information or the ability to do something specific, like view your calendars. And when this works well, it's really great. The service is asking for the specific privilege that it needs to do that task. It seems reasonable, and so you click the allow button. When it doesn't work so well, when a service either doesn't have the ability to request the specific least privilege, or the developers just don't take care, and so now here's Canvas that says, I want to use Canvas for some training, but it's asking for permission to delete all my Google Drive files. That sounds scary. I really don't want to click that allow button. So accomplishing this least privilege in practice really requires cooperation by the token issuers, by the service owners, everybody in this ecosystem, so that we're asking our users reasonable questions like the ability to view your calendars rather than delete your files. So we're building on work in the SciTokens project, which demonstrated capabilities-based authorization for distributed scientific computing, using these OAuth and JOT standards to issue bearer tokens that have the capabilities to do the specific authorization, but issue these tokens in a way that you can do the authorization in a distributed fashion. At the large scale, it's not so centralized, and so we can scale it up for the distributed high throughput computing environments that we all rely on, and do it in a way that implements the principle of least privilege, so that we define the authorizations in those capabilities so that they're specific to what you need to access, what your workflows need to access. So you can see more details at scitokens.org, and we have a lot of open source implementations over at github.com/scitokens, and these are all building on libraries that are widely used for OAuth and JSON Web Tokens across the web. So the nice thing about building on these standards is it's not just us in scientific computing going our own direction, but we're building on these well-adopted standards in the broader community. And so here's just some references to those different standards. They may come up in presentations throughout the workshop. The JOT standard, the basic OAuth standard, but also how we get metadata about the token issuers, how we exchange tokens to reduce the scope of tokens so that when your job is going out in the DHTC environment, maybe it doesn't need as much privileges as it continues its execution, or it goes to the compute element, we can exchange the token for something with reduced scope. And so this talk is meant to be about the future. One exciting thing that's happening in the very near future is this IETF draft for using JOTs with OAuth is becoming an RFC soon, and that's going to be really key for us staying aligned with the broader internet community, internet security community on using these types of tokens. But of course, we need to have profiles of using these internet standards for scientific computing. And the WLCG authorization working group has been really valuable here for defining a set of profiles for using these tokens for different types of authorizations, group-based authorization with identity tokens and access token, but also capability-based authorizations with authorization scopes. And so the SciTokens project was involved in defining this profile, and there's the link there. So that'll also be key for interoperability with WLCG and other infrastructures as we use these tokens. But there's other interesting work in scientific computing using JSON Web Tokens, using capability-based access. And so I wanted to also highlight this GA4GH example, where they are working out how to issue controlled access grants, they call it. And so this is very similar to the other types of capabilities we think about in the WLCG context or SciTokens context, where it's giving access to a particular data set because you've been registered as a bona fide researcher and you've gone through the training for how to handle genomics data, for example. And it's already seeing some good use in Elixir in Europe. And so really key to all of this is collaboration and ensuring interoperability across our computing infrastructures, our scientific computing infrastructures. And so that'll be, I think, a thread running through our discussions today and tomorrow. And then we're going to pick up that topic again on Monday in the workshop on token-based authentication and authorization. And we'll have participation by CERN, Fermilab, LIGO, and others on Monday, picking up the conversation that we're having right now. And it's all about how do we maintain reliability and interoperability as we do this transition from X509 user proxy certificates to OAuth and JOTS. But that's just one more event, but we need to continue having these workshops, continue working on details in these profiles so we understand how to apply these standards in our scientific computing infrastructures, and interop testing as we continue to integrate with different pilot job frameworks, different scientific computing applications. So we make sure to maintain that usability and interoperability that the scientists depend on. So I think our goal, or one goal that we have ahead of us, is as we move from GSI and proxy certificates to this new authorization model, we don't want to just re-implement GSI with JOTS. We want to improve security using this least privilege capability method. And we want to improve usability and interoperability because we're building on this common technology that has really great implementations in many languages and in many frameworks. It's not just something specific to cyber infrastructure or the scientific community, but JSON Web Tokens and OAuth is really being broadly adopted across the internet. And then that usability and interoperability is really key across projects because we know our scientists are using different cyber infrastructure connected to different projects. And so coordination, like we'll be discussing today, like we'll be discussing tomorrow and Monday, is really key. And while we're doing it, we need to maintain the security and the reliability of the infrastructure. So Brian Bockelman, Derek Weitzel, and I are working on a new project called SciAuth that is focused on helping OSG and other projects with this transition. And so that's part of what's supporting my participation in this meeting today. You can see more details about this new project at sciauth.org. And thinking about the future, we also need to make sure that we're building the future of the workforce who can help us support these security capabilities, these security standards going forward. So I'm really looking forward to working with the next round of, or the first round of student fellows on the SciAuth project. And if you know students interested in these topics, or if you are a student participating in the workshop today, I really do encourage you to check out sciauth.org/fellows to learn more about this fellowship opportunity. It's great to have students involved in these activities. Get hands-on experience with these technologies as we're going through this transition. And it does include a $1,000 stipend, so I hope that'll be attractive for students. And so I think I came in under time, so we'll have some good time for questions. But in case I don't answer your question today, feel free to contact me by email or hop into the SciTokens channel in the OSG Slack workspace, or you can find me or Brian or Derek, or also Jeff Gaynor is a developer on the project. And so with that, I'll stop my presentation and see what questions or comments there are. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Jim. Let me just, so I haven't seen anything in the chat. Let me just go over to the document. There's nothing in the document. Everyone's quiet. It's still early or late, depending on where you are. So if you do have questions or comments, you can also use the raise hand feature in Zoom. Yes, Brian, go ahead. I think you can unmute. Yeah, you can unmute yourself.
Yeah, I figured I'd break the ice by tossing out a softball. So, Jim, you mentioned GA4GH, which is, I guess they're probably not exclusively NIH, but I kind of think of them often weird old NIH land over there. How can we, do, or should we even do better as a global community to actually kind of tie these different efforts all together, right? There's always that pull and push of, you want as much heft to your project as possible, because that means you gain efficiencies. But then you can also lose efficiencies by trying to fit every potential use case under the sun into one thing and never get anything done. Do you have any thoughts about additional communities or individuals we should be targeting?
Yeah, we did have good NIH participation at the NSF Cybersecurity Summit just yesterday, and so maybe that'll carry over to our workshop on Monday. But otherwise, I think it'd be really great to have the GH4GH folks participate in. I'm sure we'll have a follow-on workshop in 3 or 4 months again, looking at the broader compatibility and even though SciAuth is really focused on NSF cyber infrastructure. On the CI logon side, we have some GA4GH clients right now that we're working with. And so as a token issuer, we are supporting the GA4GH tokens right alongside the WLCG tokens. And so as the different providers like CI Logon participate in the community, I think that'll also help with some information sharing.
So maybe another softball. One of the things I've heard complaints or constructive inputs is that basically you guys have been talking about tokens for 2 or 3 years. I've never seen a token, got my hands on one. How do I, where do folks get started, right? I think we often underestimate the fact that we've trained people to think a certain way for, as Frank was saying, good 17 years. It's now embedded in the back of our brains, whether we like it or not. We're good resources. What should people even know here?
I think people are going to get some good hands-on practice later in the workshop today and tomorrow. But also, I think it's by design. We have to take this transition very carefully to maintain reliability, maintain the security of our infrastructure, and so it definitely takes time to make a change this big in the security infrastructure of our cyber infrastructure, and so that's. So we don't want to rush it, but I think we're at the point now where the technology is proven. We have the profiles, we have a lot of integrations into the software that we use, and so we're going to start to see more opportunities for hands-on with these tokens today and tomorrow, and in coming up very soon.
Okay, thanks. Doug, you've had your hand raised for a little bit.
Yeah, thanks. Nice talk. One question I have is interoperability, because as a service provider, we work with multiple communities. It'll show up parenthetically in my talk, but there are many token issuers that will be used at a given data center. So interoperability is key. And I don't know, I couldn't quite get from your talk what we will. 95% interoperability, I would imagine, is an easy target, but it's the last 5% that jams things out.
Right. So we're going to have multiple issuers in the token arena, just like we have in the X509 arena. And so the profiles like the WLCG profile that ensures that these different issuers are issuing tokens that follow that same profile, have the same contents in them is really going to be key. I think interoperability testing, we've had some good hackathons already that have proven good interoperability from different token issuers, and so we'll keep doing that. And also, as we do this transition, having software that continues to support the X509 authentication as we're adding the token authentication is going to help us continue to interoperate as we're all, we're trying to coordinate on our timelines of this transition, but not everybody is going to flip the switch on the same day. And so I think another key point of that interoperability is making sure that we can we can support the different technologies during the transition.
Okay, and then I think we have time for one more question. Steve, if you want to, I should be able to unmute yourself now.
Yeah. So just following up what Doug's saying, also with the Dune hat on here, are we going to have to go and beg to every site in Europe individually saying, please kick our U.S. token issuer? Eventually, that's the nightmare that we're trying to avoid if possible. That's sort of the goal. So.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point. I think that the hope is that we'll be able to leverage a lot of the common trust frameworks that we already have, like the IGTF, and IGTF is a Tag PMA is a co-organizer of our workshop on Monday, and so having leveraging the existing trust frameworks, I think, would be really key.
Very good.
Okay, thanks everyone for good questions.